Hello and welcome in to the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. I am Greg, recruiting extraordinaire for Hail Varsity. I'm joined by Steve, staff writer, also of Hail Varsity. And today we are back for another Thursday football video as we continue to get availability with the football team as they speed towards the end of spring, which, by the way, will be here before we know it, with the red-white spring game being right around the corner on April 9th. Steve, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good, Greg. Anxious to see, I guess, what the spring kind of keeps telling us with this football program that we cover.
Yeah, and it's been an evolving picture, right? As we were kind of talking ahead of this video about, kind of what to talk about. And it hit us both, is that there's been a shift, I would say, in kind of the tone around the team over the last kind of week and a half, and what's kind of been the talk around the program, right? And I think that that's something we definitely want to explore today. Is kind of like, is that happening? Like, do we both kind of agree that that's happening? And why might that be happening right now? So I guess, Steve, my first question for you to kick things off is, do you think that there is a shift in tone that's happening with the team right now?
I think there was a shift this week specifically because like before this week, everybody knew the question marks with this team. Like there's questions all over the offensive line and all over the defensive line, which kind of important in the game of football, right?
Right.
So yeah, but like before this week, I think that there was a lot of like positive momentum and a lot of good things being said and happening, or maybe that was just, it's spring football. We're back to talking and covering about football, and everybody's in a good mood because they haven't lost games yet and everything.
Right.
But now this week, talking with just more offensive line talk and some players in that group, and same thing with the defensive line and talking with Eric Shenander. I don't know. I just think that there's a shift and everything that has come out recently with, like the tight end situation, with the kind of rash of injuries that room has endured, along with, just kind of the depth talk behind the interior defensive line. I think there's just kind of something settling in that's like, well, maybe things aren't going as well as I planned, or maybe these questions are a lot bigger than I originally thought they were. But yeah, I think that there has been a shift, I guess, of it's gone from super positive and all the way down to maybe not as positive, and kind of wondering about, like, how this season is going to start.
Man, I would say that there's been some real talk about certain position groups from coaches that you don't necessarily hear. And it's so interesting to me because for a number of reasons, but one of them being, we hear this from fans all the time. I feel like this just happened to us this week. It may have been, not to call you out, it's not your fault, it may have been the Yant story about him losing weight from not eating Raising Cane's and locking in on his nutrition and all of that. And yeah. I am 100% sure that I retweeted that, thought it was cool, and a fan responded and said, oh, it's spring football Kool-Aid season, you guys are pumping the Kool-Aid. And so we always have that to kind of battle with. And it's interesting because, on the other hand, people say that, but I think the coaching staff this spring, and particularly in the last couple of weeks, have been as honest as we've seen them be about certain position groups, right? And I think that, they're never going to come out and flat out say, well, this is bad, or, it's just not going to work with player X. But there are definitely some breadcrumbs that they're leaving for fans to say, well, hey, wait a second, there's a couple of issues with this team right now, namely along the lines of scrimmage, which is concerning headed into a Big Ten season.
Yeah, and we can sort of break those down a little bit. The first one that comes to my mind was Eric Shenander, the defensive coordinator this week, and then Mike Dawson, the D-line, interior D-line and outside linebackers coach. They were asked, I guess, the depth at their positions on the interior D-line spot. And, we have Ty Robinson there, and Casey Rogers is coming off injury, but he's kind of viewed as like almost like a sure bet. And I don't know if that's really true or not. He's when he's been out there, he's been good. But the thing is, can he stay out there for a full Big Ten season? He hasn't really shown that yet in his career. And then going with Ty Robinson, I really like what Ty Robinson did last year. As Shenander said, he's still a young guy, contrary to what a lot of people think. But he's been in the program now. He's learning, and he's built his body up that he can kind of be viewed as the leader of that group and do some good things there and continue to grow his game. And he really needs to take a massive step forward, just because of they're going to be depending on Ty Robinson a lot in that interior defensive line at that 1 and 3 tech. But behind those guys is who I was kind of hoping that Shenander and Dawson would kind of, enlighten us about, like, who's stepping up. And they didn't really mention a ton of names. Like Masai Newsome has been there and might be the guy that gets some, I guess, reps when they need it in the backup to provide depth. But he only mentioned Shenander mentioned Masai Newsome because he's the oldest in the group basically there. So I don't know if that pumps some momentum and positivity into your veins, but I just think that there was a lot of question marks going on and not a lot of maybe answers that they know about right now, which it's spring ball. So you can, they don't need to have it figured out right at this instant, but it's just something to keep an eye on.
Oh, I think they gave you the answer about what's happening behind those guys without giving you an answer about what's happening with those guys. I think that when you have a coach, and Eric Shenander did this this past week, that tells when you asked him this about about the guys behind him, and he rattles off everyone. To me, that's never a good sign, because there aren't a couple of guys that he can then point to and say, these guys are really standing out and have stepped up. I like that you mentioned a real key point here, that that's what spring ball is for, though. Like, it is for getting those guys. And I think you, me, and I think Mike Babcock, who's also on our staff, were talking about this while we were waiting for post-practice one day this week, about the best way to get those players ready, though, is to go through this spring and get them experience, and then get them experience in games in the fall. Like, I think that I know that everyone wants those guys behind Casey and Ty to just jump in there and they're ready to hit the ground running and go, but it just doesn't sound like that's the way that things are going, and that's the direction, and it may take a little while for that to all come together, which in the long run can be fine. The problem is that you're really putting that, to me, the ultimate problem is you're putting that up against really a must-win season for Nebraska. When you go out in that very first game in Ireland against Northwestern, Nebraska needs to be ready to stop the run against Northwestern, and they have to have that game. Like, it's going to be critical that Nebraska starts this season well, because we know what happens with the schedule in the back end of the season. And so there really just isn't a lot of wiggle room for that. So I think that's where you have kind of the ultimate push-pull within this. But they still have some time left in spring to continue to work those things out.
Yeah. And I think we both kind of understand that, I think we both kind of predict that, the first thing that Northwestern is going to try to do on Nebraska is just run it down those A and B and C gaps, and see if Nebraska can stop it with those new guys in the middle of that interior. So it's going to be really interesting and something that, I'm just going to keep my eye on. And one thing I need to kind of remind myself is that, like we talked about, this is still spring ball, and it might not be the smartest thing to do to, make harsh judgments right now, because there's such a long time to go. They're going to go through a fall camp and everything. And who knows what the transfer portal might provide too, as O'Shawn Mathis is attending the spring game, right?
Yes, he is.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on O'Shawn and what kind of, I guess, possibility that could present, and what kind of a big addition that would be to Nebraska's defensive line group.
Yeah, it's funny. I can't remember if we said this on video or you and I were just talking about this. And I know I've mentioned it, I mentioned it last week in Big Red Recon, in that you have to, for Nebraska to start to feel better about their prospects of upgrading the defensive line through the transfer portal. Some of these guys, or one of them, the big one in particular, O'Shawn Mathis, needed to set a visit to Nebraska. I said that last week. And this week we find out that he's taken an official visit for the spring game. So that's great news for Nebraska. Anytime that Nebraska gets a guy on campus for an official visit, I believe that they have a shot to get them, right? They do a very good job on those official visits. Guys, it's consistent, where you get guys that come in and they say, man, Lincoln was totally different than I thought. Like, this place is one big family. Like, the fan base is crazy. Like, you can just write some of those things out that he's going to say coming out of that visit, which is a really positive thing for Nebraska. It's going to probably come down to the fit within the defense, and then the relationship that he's able to build with Eric Chenander and Mike Dawson versus what he's got going with some of the coaches at Texas. But I think Nebraska has a really good shot, and he would be, I think, an instant contributor, especially as someone who can get after the quarterback. I've said this a bunch in a lot of different places. I think that Nebraska having a guy that could get 5 or 6 sacks on their team, and that's putting at a moderate number, would do wonders for this defense, right? If you could get those types of that type of production from a guy or two, it would just really help this defense out overall, especially as, like we've talked about, you got a lot of moving pieces, right? And a lot of parts that just kind of need to get settled in. Like, there's a lot of things to be excited about, particularly in the back seven of this defense, but how much will that matter if A, they can't stop the run, and B, they can't get pressure on a quarterback?
Yeah, absolutely. And if O'Shawn decides to come here and play at Nebraska, it's going to be a major win for the program, and a major win for Nebraska and its NIL purposes, and kind of what they can do for guys in the transfer portal. Is just if they can land him, it's gonna open a lot more doors for other guys that are looking for landing spots that could potentially help this program. And O'Shawn, I've watched some interviews, watched a lot of highlights and games from his time at TCU. He's a very engaging, big personality type guy, which I think is kind of cool for an edge guy.
Cool.
6'5", 260 pounds. He's got that NFL frame that you want, and he's had a heck of a career and has all the stats that you kind of want. At TCU, he has over 23 tackles for losses, and has 11 and a half sacks in 3 years at TCU. So he's just a huge priority right now. Landing him would be absolutely incredible, a huge get for this program. So we'll see what he likes about Chenander, Dawson, and who he's going to be playing with, as well as we'll see what kind of atmosphere the spring game provides, and kind of see if that impresses him.
Yeah, we definitely will be keeping an eye on that, and so much more. As like we said, we continue to speed towards that spring game. We've got coverage of other sports on Hail Varsity as well. You've got baseball happening right now, too. We'll see if they can get things turned around. I feel like I keep having to say that to you, Steve. Make sure you guys are keeping it locked on hailvarsity.com and on this YouTube channel. Like, subscribe to the videos, continue leaving comments, so we can continue to have those discussions with you guys. We really enjoy the ability to do that. We will catch you guys next week.